Hello, and welcome to Leadership as a Philosophy, Not a Checklist, book discussion 18 on the personal memoirs of Ulysses S. Grant. So, quick funny story. This is the second time I've had to do this because my camera decided to freeze halfway through, and I have no idea when it did, and I was in the middle of a thought, so we're starting over. It'll be better because it's always better when I do it twice. All right. So, General Grant. A couple things I want to talk about real quick, and I want to encourage all of you watching this to do. I would not believe any stories about any historical figure unless you've gone and found some actual sources about it. Here's the reason I say this. As soon as I say General Grant, a bunch of people are going to go, oh, drunk, oh, this, oh, butcher, oh, this, oh, that. Well, I started trying to research all those because when I was a kid, I was a big history nut. And so I did a project on the Civil War in 8th grade. And you hear all these terrible things about General Grant. So I start to look, and I found out that all of those sources are somebody doing another source where they heard, but there's no actual evidence. In his memoir, General Grant is correcting stories that were written incorrectly about him at the time. And those stories, even though he says these weren't true, have perpetuated since then. And so really, it's a bunch of people that just didn't like Grant writing a bunch of terrible stuff about him. And I'm going to refute a couple of them. He even admits at a couple places that he had some problems with drinking. But is it as rampant as we think? I don't know. I don't agree. Reading this book, I don't see evidence for about 2/3 of the claims that people said about him. And so, obviously it's an autobiography, so he can write what he wants. But I'm several times I've read books and go, wait, this is nothing of what I thought, because I had these misperceptions. So there's a bunch of misinformation that's out there, and I really encourage you to go do some more work, because it's been very useful for me. I mean, now my assumption is, you've heard me say it before, we're going to go as close to the source as possible. My assumption is if it's some book that somebody else wrote about somebody else, and I might not have time to check all the sources, I'm not buying it unless I can get a direct piece of evidence. So comments on the book. So this is the sort of book that leaders should write. And it's the sort of book that most leaders don't write, because leaders don't think that there's anything special about what they were doing. Okay? So he talks about, here's some situations and here's the way that we solved them. Here's the situation that was on the ground. Here's how I solved it. He doesn't brag. He doesn't say, oh, I had this brilliant insight and did this and the other thing. He just, here's what I did. And in very simple and plain language. So he talks about the success, here's how we won. But then when there's a mistake that happened, he takes 100% responsibility or accountability. He even takes responsibility for for generals that were under his command that made mistakes, and he didn't fire fast enough. He said, this is a mistake that I made because I had a feeling that I should have gotten rid of this person earlier, and I didn't. And then it all came to pass, and it wasn't great. So completely unconscious of his leadership ability, right? He has no idea what it is. He just, the way he writes, when you read it, you go, oh, this is written by somebody that's a leader. Because everything that he says just makes sense, and it's common sense, and it seems like it's normal. It's like somebody telling a story about going to the grocery store, but it's this huge conflict. Consistently demonstrates integrity. He's always correcting flaws in new stories. He talks about, well, this was what was being said, but here's what was going on. And so he's got, gives good perspective to stuff. One of the things I wanted to address in here real quick is that there's always this thing that, oh, Grant was a butcher and just wanted to grind through and slaughter people. He didn't care about casualties. Well, there's no evidence of that in this book. He talks all the time. He fires a couple of generals because they were too slow getting to where he wanted them to. Pardon me. And so the casualties were too high. He consistently talks about making sure that he's getting supplies for his soldiers. Pardon me. He's constantly getting supplies for his soldiers because he wants to make sure that they're fed, because they won't fight if they're not. Hold on a second. All right. That's what happens when you have to do a video twice. You talk too much, your throat gets scratchy. Anyway, he is always trying to take care of his troops. There's one instance where it's pouring down rain somewhere, and the only place that he knew that was dry, because he didn't have a tent, because he didn't travel in luxury, he went into one of the casualty tents, and he couldn't handle seeing the sight of all of his soldiers suffering. So he went and slept back out in the rain. So really that he's a butcher? The couple of instances where there was this huge casualty rates, it was, like I said, because generals that he wanted to do stuff got there too slow, or took too long, or delayed, and then all this stuff happened, and then they ended up having a bigger fight than they had to. And so, maybe don't assume so much about the brutality of what Grant expected. So born with the leadership talent, and this is something that, another way to think about it. You can see in the book and through history, you see other stories where when he was by himself on the West Coast, when he was in West Point, he wasn't a very good student. I think he said he was in the bottom third of the class. When he was in the Mexican-American War, he did fine. He had a couple of nice instances, had a couple cool maneuvers. But in between, he was a failed businessman. He didn't understand business. He wasn't good at that sort of stuff. But when then suddenly there's a bunch of competence hierarchies, an environment, and a goal, he was great at it. So he thrived in situations where there was leadership requirements. And that's something to think about, right? Find the person that's good and put them where they're good. Next slide. All right, useful examples. I thought that was interesting. I've seen it before. It's worth stating now. When they assembled all the regiments in Illinois, sure, Ohio. When they assembled all their regiments to go off to the war, they said, well, we assembled the regiments, they elected their officers and their sergeants, and then we started to do drill. Now, what a great indicator, at least initial indicator, of who's got leadership ability. Who would those people voluntarily follow into combat? Well, they picked them. Now, what that happens is, here they're selected, and then combat picked them. In other words, if they went out and performed poorly, they got fired. So then they would promote somebody who was performing, but at least you knew initially who they would voluntarily follow into combat. Well, it should be the same way in most organizations. I always think these 360 evaluations are a great idea, but always poorly implemented. Go down to the team. Hey, we're thinking about giving this person a promotion. Would you voluntarily follow them? No, that's the one that you should be keeping an eye on. And how do you know? Well, usually they're humble and they're not taking credit for anything. But when they all say, well, we'll do what they say because they have integrity and they're honest, this person's a backstabber and a liar. Who do you promote? Promote the one that they're going to voluntarily follow. Now, you promote them and they fail, fine. But at least you know that the team's going to be happy with who's in charge. And if you've been doing your job right as a leader, you would be down there knowing who the person that they would voluntarily follow was anyway. So, great evaluations. He wrote these things. They're the best evaluations I've ever seen. They were 2 sentences on some of his officers. This person right here, super knowledgeable, great, diligent, loyal, not great at offense. Put them in the defense, they're amazing. But if you put them on the offense where they have to think and react, not great. So that's basically their evaluation. Well, good. So put that person in defense. It's not that they're a failure. That's what they're really good at. Had another officer. He was great, but he needed to be left around a division because as soon as he got put in charge of too many divisions, he was trying to dictate too much stuff and he just couldn't handle it. But you put him in a division that was just sort of where he operated the best. What a great evaluation. That's what you want. You want the person, hey, this person's really good at this. Okay, well, let him stay there. This whole up and out thing is dumb. You find somebody that's the expert at their competency, keep paying them to be at their competency. Right? I don't know where this thing came from where, you have to climb the ladder or you're not a success. Boy, you find somebody that's doing the thing they love the most, that's success. And then we talked about this. So the officers were selected, sergeants were selected, but then they got relieved if they couldn't perform. And it was just on competence. It wasn't anything else. He didn't care if they were from West Point. He didn't care where they got their commission. He didn't care anything. If they could lead, they got the job, right? I mean, it's easy. So here's the best quote. I've always hated it. I've always hated it. Well, I have to go do this job for 2.5 years, and then I'm going to go schmooze with this person because I want that job, and then I'm doing that for 2, and then I'm going to schmooze for that job. So that means you're just really good at climbing ladders, right? We have no proof that you're good at anything else. What you should do is you get picked to go do a leadership job. You go do your best at it. Because then we're going to know, hey, it's not the greatest job ever. Great leader. So here's his quote about that. And this says it better than I just did. So it's people who wait to be selected, not those who seek, from whom we may always expect the most efficient service. Right? You go and you pick somebody, hey, I need you to go take charge of this. I don't want to. Go. Okay. And then they go over there and kick butt. It's great. So, quick leadership stories. How am I doing? Oh, just going quick. So he wasn't interested in serving until the soldiers, the regiments that he was training, asked him to apply. So when the regiments were assembled in his state, he helped drill them because he had experience. And then people started saying, hey, you really need to apply. So then when he applied, he asked to be the colonel of a regiment. And I just really enjoyed the statement where he said, well, I decided that a colonel was the right spot because I was looking at who they were putting in charge of regiments, and I figured I could do at least that good. But that's, again, that's the thing. Oh, I can do that. I'll go do that. Another quick story. So Battle of Vicksburg, you can go read about the Vicksburg campaign. I recommend reading it in this book because it's the best story I ever saw of it. So Sherman gets to Vicksburg. It's this really complicated place. Lots of water, lots of rivers, lots of high ground, all these complicated terrain. And he's trying for several months to get to Vicksburg. And he can't figure out a good way because he didn't want people to get slaughtered. Finally, he figures out this thing where they basically go sneak around, go way behind, and attack from behind. It takes months. During this time, the media is writing that he's lazy and a coward and scared. And that's not exactly what happened at all. So I guess when he came up with his final plan, Sherman went into him, pulled him in a tent, and said, hey, this is bad, this is terrible. Sherman was his subordinate. These are all bad ideas, we're going to fail. Grant said, there's no other option. Sherman says, all right, fine, we'll go do it. So they went and did it. They won. All the VIPs come down to visit because they want to claim, we got to go see the victory or whatever. And Sherman was surrounded by a bunch of politicians and media, and they were congratulating him on his success. He said, the success is not mine. It's all Grant. Because I didn't want to do it. I thought it was a bad idea. Grant said, we're doing it anyway, and here we are. So he gets all the credit. What's great about the relationship between those two, I also am going to read Sherman's autobiography, is the way that they respected each other. They hardly said, from what you see written, they hardly said anything to each other. But at one point, they have a whole new division full of brand new recruits. And Grant says, well, I gave them to Sherman because an officer that fine will fix anything, or will get them ready. What sort of, that one sentence, he's entrusting however many a division was at the time, 10,000 brand new soldiers. He trusts that Sherman's going to get them in shape. Who are you going to trust with somebody's life, right? So then there's the clerk. This quote could have been written by me. He said, well, as soon as I got promoted to a senior position, I had to get somebody to take care of my paperwork because the only thing I could reliably be trusted to do with a piece of paper was put it in a pocket and forget about it. I don't know anybody else like that. But again, right, he has a problem, or not problem, something he's not great at, so he gets somebody to fill the gap. I don't understand because I've seen it a little bit lately and I haven't really talked about it. I get annoyed by this idea that the person that's the leader is supposed to be infallible. You want the leader to be the best at the leadership ability. If they've got other things they're not great at, get people around them that will help them. Because if they're good at that thing, then the leader's going to be better at their thing. But instead it's, I'm the leader and therefore I can make no mistakes. It's just the worst. I had one officer that got selected by his subordinates, and he would go out and party with them all the time, drinking, carousing and whatnot. And when they found out they were actually going to combat, they all basically mutinied and said, we're not going to work for that guy. So they had to pick somebody else. But, you hear all the time, don't hang out too much. I mean, be close with your people, but don't be super close with your people because they have to respect you. So even though they elected him, it might be because that guy was real popular, not somebody they would trust in a crisis. Maybe that's the other aspect of, so we say who you would voluntarily follow and who do you go to in a crisis, which I guess is the same thing. I guess whoever you're going to in a crisis is who you would follow if they came up with a decision. So the initial stance, I think. Then he had one officer that was his aide. Well, his aide. Yeah, I guess it was his aide. And he said, you remember all the way back in up the organization, he said, you need to have somebody in your organization that is the BS detector. So if some plan is stupid, he says, this is stupid. He said, this guy was a great, reliable, loyal officer. But when he said no, he said it in such a way that you realized that further negotiation was inconsequential. But it's the same idea, right? You need somebody that goes, no, this is dumb. What are we doing this for? All because blah, blah, blah. Dumb. Oh, okay. Well, let's not do it. So then let's go through the archetypal leadership model. And like I said, it's a 500 and 600 and something page book. And it reads real easy because it's written very simply. And of course, if you know the story, Grant was broke, got voted out as president, and it failed businesses. A bunch of people took advantage of him, took all of his money. So he's basically broke and writes his memoir, finishes it, and dies a month later. And then his wife became rich off of the royalties. And so it's just one of these books that's just so rare, Anyway, did he have humility? Yes. He always dressed, he didn't have a bunch of uniforms, didn't travel with a big bunch of tents, did not want to do anything better than, didn't want to lord himself over his soldiers. Like I said, takes credit for mistakes. Integrity, absolutely. Again, takes credit for mistakes, was trying to set the record straight on things. There was a couple of times where he said, hey, the media started this story saying that I had said this about this officer. I never said that. He said, that didn't happen. I said, I did say this, but I didn't say that. And that not from a defensive thing, just the fact that he had integrity. Empathy, absolutely. Talks all the time. He's always trying to take care of his soldiers, trying to take care of his people. I would say, and of course he was a general, but some of the stuff is, here's how I got supplies to my people. Another quick little story about supplies. He talks about the fact that they were in some place where they were doing, foraging for food. And the only thing that they found and the only thing they had for a couple of weeks was chicken. And then some people showed up after one of their victories. I think it might have been Vicksburg. And they brought a bunch of chickens. And everybody's like, oh, great, thanks. Just reminds me when I was in Panama way long time ago. I was working a pretty important position. And so when we had to pick food, this was during the Operation Just Cause. So our food was those MREs. Well, everybody's least favorite one was the ham and egg omelet. Oh. Well, because I was working this important thing, I didn't go pick my food, so that's all that was ever left. So I ate ham and egg omelets for 3 or 4 days. Lots of Tabasco and salt and pepper. That's the way. And then hold your nose. That's how you eat those. They don't make them anymore. Vigilance, yes, always. He's always could see stuff, seeing what's going to happen, seeing where things are going to go. So he had the 4 essential characteristics, and did he have the talent? Absolutely. You can just see it in the way that he talks, the way that he writes about people, the way that he was able to select officers that were better, or fire people because they weren't sufficient. And so, to conclude, right? Oh, why did I do that? This is the version that I read. You can find it online for free in a PDF. The one other thing I liked about this is there was footnotes at the bottom. So when he said, hey, this and this and this, the guy would give a source that confirmed what Grant had said. So it's got some additional footnotes. There may be other versions. This just happens to be the one that I read. But I really encourage that you go and read it because you get a completely different impression of who he was. And you also don't get the thing that he's trying to gloss over a bunch of stuff. It's pretty honest. It's a really good book. But this is the sort of stuff that we should get from people that are leaders. These are the sort of behaviors that you want. Go look at that and glean some leadership examples and realize that's what you should be aiming at, not glory and all this other crap. All right, so pretty good. Under 20 minutes. Like I said, more of these things in the future are going to be on examples of what we should be aiming for. That's it. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you all have a good day.